My name's Neil Lazarus from awesomeseminars.com, and I'm speaking today as part of my regular podcast, together with Daniel Pomerantz, who is the new executive director of honestreporting.com.
That's right. It's been 5 months. It feels sometimes like 5 years because a lot's happened in a short time.
So let's go back a bit. How did Honest Reporting start in all those years gone? It's been going for a while. I think most people know the name. Most people visited your website, honestreporting.com. How did it all start?
It's 18 years ago it started. You remember during the Intifada, the second Intifada, there was a young man who was on the... there was a picture in the New York Times that said an Israeli policeman beating a Palestinian man. It showed an Israeli policeman with his club over his head and a young boy with blood all over his head, and it said it's on the Temple Mount. And it turned out it wasn't on the Temple Mount, and it was not... even a Palestinian boy. It was a Jewish boy studying in yeshiva. His name was Tuvia Grossman. And we did a letter writing campaign, or a bunch of people did a letter writing campaign to the New York Times saying you got this headline completely backwards. As it turned out, the policeman was a Druze Arab Israeli who was protecting a Jewish boy from a Palestinian mob. So the story was completely reversed. And when you think about it, it's one of those beautiful stories of coexistence where Jews and Arabs really are. It's not Jews against Arabs. It's Jews and Arabs and everyone else against terrorists.
But hold on. That was 18 years ago.
Yes.
Let's cut to the chase, which is, that's 18 years ago, Second Intifada, violence. Totally agree with you. The press was against Israel. That was really before social media. Is honest reporting still relevant, or has it passed its time?
Oh, sadly, we are. It's one of the few professions where I'm always sad to say we have more than enough business. We see bias in the press all the time. Sometimes it's just naivete. Journalists believe in a narrative and don't know any better. Sometimes it's intentional bias because they have a specific story they want to tell. Sometimes it really is anti-Semitism. Such a thing exists too. And we see a tremendous amount of this. Just about a year and a half ago, we had what they called the knife intifada. And we saw frequently headlines that would say, Israeli policeman shoots Palestinian man to death. And then at the end of the article, they might mention, oh yeah, and the man who got shot was stabbing someone at the time. That's sort of the most obvious form of bias.
Hold on. Isn't honest reporting really just a bunch of fetching Jews? In other words, you're cherry picking. Okay, yeah, but give me hard facts. Give me hard numbers of research that's been done, academic research has done, because the other side have certainly done it.
You mean in terms of how much bias versus how much not bias?
Right.
You know, it's very difficult to do that accurately. We put together a project only to realize that even within our own staff, much less out in the outside world, everybody's understanding of what constitutes bias versus what constitutes fair is slightly different.
So hold on, let's pick you up on that. What is biased? Is honest reporting? How honest is honest reporting?
Well, it's one thing I try to make clear to everyone we talk to. Honest reporting, we're not reporters. When we say honest reporting, it doesn't mean we're reporting honestly.
But you're saying that reporters who are honest are biased.
Well, what we're saying is, first of all, our job is to keep the reporters honest. So when you say how honest is honest reporting...
So what's honesty for you?
Yeah, for us, honesty is a certain kind of professionalism. You know how when you hear about doctors, they brag that I treat all patients the same, doesn't matter if it's a terrorist or a victim or a criminal, I bring the patients in, I treat everybody equally, and they take pride in that, as they should. But doctors have a certain luxury in that they know that if they treat a terrorist, that terrorist is eventually going to go into the court system where other people are going to have to make the hard choices about, is this really the person? Is there really evidence and all that?
You're losing me on the analogy.
Yeah.
Why is honest reporting not cherry picking?
The point of the analogy is that that's what journalists are supposed to do too. And these days you see a lot of journalists saying, why did you go into journalism? They say to make a difference in the world. Wrong. You do not go into journalism to make a difference in the world. You want to make a difference? You want to be an activist? Join an activist group. There's plenty of room for it. It's a wonderful thing to do.
I disagree.
A journalist is like a doctor. They should treat everybody the same. Get the story out.
But I disagree.
Yeah? How do you disagree?
No, for example, somewhere like CNN, you would watch CNN because it's a much more liberal news outlet. You watch Fox for its neoconservatism. In other words, that today... journalism is selling to a niche market. That niche market is increasingly anti-Israel.
Yeah, but let me ask you this. What is Fox News' tagline? What is their logo?
Whatever.
Fair and balanced, right? And what is CNN's? I forgot what CNN's is. But right, so nobody admits that they have a leaning in that way. The ideal of journalism, what journalism's supposed to be, what journalists say they are, is balanced, fair, accurate. That's what journalism is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be accurate.
So hold on, isn't the problem from the example you're giving that honest and fair and balanced is something which is relative to what you see?
No, it's not. It's like
give me 5 rules of what you would say fair and balanced is.
well, first of all, you have to fact check. What we see a lot in the news these days is, well, one side said this and the other side said this, but what if one of the sides is a liar? We see that people fact check President Trump all the time, as they should, but Mahmoud Abbas, the Ayatollah, is the worst human rights offenders in the world. They just put in their quote and maybe put in a quote from the other side and give those quotes equal weight, even though one of them could easily be fact checked and shown to be false. So number 1, fact check. Number 2, there should be balance. Balance is not the same thing as accuracy, but there should also be balance. For example, we saw an article about a year ago in the Washington Post talking about how horrible it is for Palestinians to go through a checkpoint, and it's humiliating, and it takes a long time, and interferes with their life. They're not wrong. Some of those things are the case. They didn't speak to a single family that had been a victim of terrorism to explain why those checkpoints are there and what they prevent. So there's, first of all, fact-checking. Second of all, balance. Third is transparency. If you got your information from a fixer, a person on the ground who's helping you get somewhere, and that fixer is working for the Palestinian government, or that fixer is somebody who lives in Gaza and will die if Hamas sees them put out the wrong story, or if your journalist is someone who will lose access to Gaza and to their sources if Hamas, which is a terror group, sees that they put out a story they don't like, those are things the public has to know. So, what do we say? Balance, fact-checking, transparency. And there are a lot of examples of where those come into play.
But facts on the ground would disagree with you. For example, a recent report which came out, which was called 50 Years of Occupation, disagrees with some of the things you're saying. They're not saying that there isn't one way or the other, there isn't bias both sides. So basically, they're saying something like over 4 times more Israeli-centric headlines than Palestinian. In other words, without the academic research saying, look, we can give you the numbers, you don't stand to stand to convince anyone other than your own supporters.
Well, we're not trying to convince. First of all, I don't know their methodology. How did they? What do they define as Israel-centric? What if something's on the borderline? Second of all, if something is Israel-centric, does that mean it's positive toward Israel, or does that mean it's negative?
Well, it's interesting. They're claiming that 44% of Israeli headlines were negative compared to 48% of Palestinian headlines.
Right. Again, we don't know their methodology. You have to break it down. What do they? Like I said, when we did a study like this in-house, even we, within our own organization, couldn't always agree.
But that comes back to the basic problem I'm having with honest reporting, which is it, let's call it not honest reporting, but reporting that disagrees with a right-wing religious view?
Well, we don't take a political position, and we don't take a right-wing or left-wing position. And you shouldn't have to. Balance and accuracy, fact-checking, transparency are not right or left issues, and they shouldn't be. But I'd say...
But someone who's critical, say, of settlements, within Israel there's that criticism.
We don't take a position on settlements. It's contentious within Israel. It's contentious outside of Israel. We do take the position that if somebody says this person was killed by a terrorist attack because they're a settler, or a settler was killed instead of a child was killed, or a person or an Israeli was killed, we take the position that you have to treat settlers as human beings. But if somebody wants to take a position about whether settlements are right or wrong, we don't get into that. First of all, it's an opinion, so journalists shouldn't be getting into that level of opinion unless it's an op-ed. If someone does write an op-ed, we don't take a position on that question. If someone does insert their opinion into a story that's supposed to be hard facts, we will critique that. But we don't take a position right-left, and we don't take a position settlement, non-settlement. We recognize that people have strong opinions, and we respect that.
Let's go 18 years forward from when you started to the recent elections. Probably that's the biggest story. Re-election of Benjamin Netanyahu. How did the media cover it?
I'll tell you what, an interest. We have our Media Central program. It's that works with us. They take journalists to the stories, give them press conferences, press trips, and they were the Israeli Foreign Press Office trusted them to arrange access to a lot of the events, and they had a number of events for journalists throughout the weeks around election time. And I have to say, thanks to them, the coverage this year was much better than I've ever seen it in the past. It was straightforward, it was balanced, it gave an accurate picture. When there were problems, they were usually problems that focused on the idea that Israelis clearly don't want peace because they elected Netanyahu. Or Netanyahu was elected and he doesn't represent the Israeli people, even though he was just elected by the Israeli people. And so the position that we take is, the peace process is a complex issue that involves more than one party. And the current prime minister, whoever that prime minister is, and during Honest Reporting's existence, there have been several from the right, left, and center, whoever the prime minister is, represents the will of Israel's democracy. But there was relatively little of that editorializing. And for the most part, the press just covered that here was the election and here's what happened. And I give Media Central a lot of credit for that.
But I think the media in many ways has changed since you started. And my challenge would be, how much has Honest Reporting changed? When you started, people were worried about what was written in the New York Times and a photo.
Yeah.
Today, everyone is a journalist. We're speaking, I know my podcasts have seen something like 20,000 downloads, and that's just me.
Yeah.
Okay. How has social media changed media, and how has it changed what you do?
Well, social media has brought a lot more voices in. It's lowered the barriers to entry. Sometimes it's a good thing because people like you can speak. Sometimes it's a bad thing because people who have agendas can speak and they're not constrained by any professional ethical duties. We're very active on Twitter. We're very active on Facebook. We found that a lot of the information, though, that people speak about originates still with mainstream media. Like, this story came out on CNN, and I'm going to tell you what I think about it. So mainstream media still plays an important role. It's just that you get a lot more commentary on social media.
But it goes the other way. In other words, the mainstream media is now dependent on social media, which is different.
To some extent, to get their message out, it makes their audience larger. They're still...
No, but they're tracking social media. In other words, journalists are also tracking what's going on Twitter to pick up their stories. So you have a different... stories are being generated also within social media and being it's now a two-way feed.
So, some stories are. But, for example, if there's a terrorist attack in Israel, the press here, the first place they're going is to all of the relevant government offices, to the police, the fire, to the Palestinian Authority government, the Israeli government, to the scene where it actually happened. I mean, they're not going to Twitter unless it's just to find out that something happened. But even then, they often get...
I disagree with you. If you look at, for example, coverage in Gaza, a lot of the coverage which is coming out is coming from pro cameras or people's cameras, which are being held, or their phones, which are then being posted to Twitter and then being reposted onto mainstream media.
Some of that is, although most of those cameras are just sitting there with nothing happening. But when you have the press telling the story, they come to the press might see that happen on Twitter and then send their people to the scene. But who's getting a quote from the Gaza government, which is Hamas, which is a terror organization, which the press should say more often?
But aren't you ignoring really how people get their news today has changed from when Honest Reporting started? Honest Reporting started with, we're getting our newspaper, we're watching 4 or 5 stations, we'll flick, so on and so forth. Yeah. Today, most people get their news from the phone.
No, I'm not, and I'll tell you what the problem is, we're speaking too fast. What I'm not saying is not that it hasn't changed, but that all I was saying was as a preamble that mainstream press is still relevant. But you're right. In addition to that, we have a YouTube channel that we've got a video out right now discussing Ilhan Omar that just has slightly over 1 million views and is still going. We have videos that...
So if people want to watch that, where should they look at that?
They go to youtube.com/honestreportingvideo or just to honestreporting.com, and there we have a link to our YouTube channel.
Right.
So that's one example of a way that we're reaching out to huge numbers. I mean, 1 million views, that's larger than CNN's primetime ratings.
Exactly. So I think that is proving what I'm saying. In other words, that the media itself has changed from when Honest Reporting had started, and therefore Honest Reporting has to change.
Right, so we're changing in that. So that's one way that we reach people directly through the YouTube channel and through our other social, through Twitter and Facebook. We did an excellent piece we've done a number of pieces that specifically target young, liberal-minded people on campus speaking their language, which is different than the language of someone who's... For example, we put out a video just recently with a young woman who was working with us, Cindy Seni. She's young, she's Jewish, but has that very Mizrahi kind of look, some dark skin and curly hair. And she was going on there speaking about...
Somewhat of a stereotype, but we'll let you go, yeah.
Yes, somewhat of a stereotype, but the point is that it's a stereotype that reaches young people who think that Jews are all white Europeans. And she was there, and we took people on the street, and we took some of her friends, and be interviewing people, are you Jewish? Yes. Are you... and you see all this different variety of ethnicities. We had another one about anti-Semitism. When I talk about anti-Semitism, for example, with the Ilhan Omar situation, I talk about there's a definition, and it's not just up to your opinion. If what you're saying fits this definition, then it's anti-Semitism, end of the story. She took a very different approach, which works for young people, which is, why are people who aren't Jewish telling me, a Jewish woman, that what they're saying isn't anti-Semitic? You wouldn't say that to a black person. Right. You wouldn't say that to a Latino person. You wouldn't say that to gay, lesbian, bisexual people. Why are Jews the only ones treated differently? And if Jews are the only ones treated differently, isn't that in itself anti-Semitism and racism?
Totally agree with you.
Now, some of the more conservative-leaning people said, why are you adopting the identity politics language of the left? And the answer is, because if you want to speak to someone on the left, you speak the language of the left. And we also speak to people on the right in the language of the right. I always say you have to reach people where they are. Now we're kind of getting into your turf, which is how to communicate.
Right. So it's interesting that you're moving that way. And as far as YouTube is concerned, what are other sources? We know the honestreporting.com website.
Yeah.
How many hits are you getting nowadays?
We get, in general, we tend to get about 250,000 hits a month. And a month where there's a war, it could be more. And a month that's slow, it could be a little bit less. This month is going to be lower because there's Passover and journalists aren't around. So it depends all the time. But we don't just look to the website. We look to social media traffic in general. But to answer your question, which is an important one, we've got a real exciting program going on. I just mentioned Media Central. They're the ones who got the journalists coming by. They have a program where they're bringing bloggers. Now, and for anyone who doesn't know what a blogger is, that's somebody...
Welcome to our planet.
Yes, welcome to our planet. Bloggers and vloggers, which is video bloggers,
right.
They're writing essays online, and people look to them. Young people form their worldview based on these bloggers. And bloggers have audiences in the millions. And
I understood you spoke to the same group I did 2 hours before. They said they just had you.
Which group was that?
The blogger group that were in Jerusalem. There was about... where were they staying? They were staying down the road. And they had visited you.
Oh, how about that?
I remember the group because they corrected my grammar and I realised how bad my English has got after 30 years of being in the country.
Yes.
So.
Well, I work with Brits. They're ruining my perfectly good American.
We'll let you have it. You should never have got independence.
They've gone round the bend.
Too soon.
So they put together this project. They got these bloggers. They're bringing them on an all-expense-paid trip to Israel. A lot of them are going to be bloggers in the area of travel. You might say, why travel, or why food, or why something else? Because young people are very suspicious of political commentators, and yet they will give carte blanche and believe anything they hear from someone who isn't in politics.
And isn't a journalist.
And isn't even a journalist, which is in itself not really the most astute way to listen to the news, because anybody could be biased or ignorant or whatever. But this is how young people get their news. It's how they form their worldview. So we bring them here to see Israel for themselves, to bring them on professional level press tours. No one else can do that.
Right.
There are other organizations that bring foodies and travel people and whatever, but they can't bring them on a professional press tour like we do.
Gotcha.
So we are just a few $1,000s short of the budget that we need to bring these bloggers. So if anyone's listening, you can go to honestreporting.com/donate, and you can help us make this bloggers program happen. And if you specifically want to donate for this, you can just write in the comments field, this is for the bloggers project. And
so say that again, for those people, if you're looking at how to help with your work at Honest Reporting, to donate, for example, to bring those bloggers out, to bring people who are involved in social media, people who are under the age of 25, because you have to be. Again, give us the address. So you
go to everything's at honestreporting.com, and then you can click the button that says donate, or you could go to honestreporting.com/donate if you're good with remembering addresses, and you can click there and make a donation in general, or you could specifically say that this is for the bloggers project or for the YouTube project if you like, and that will help us get to the number that we need. We need $50,000 total. We've already had a generous donor who's matching every donation dollar for dollar, so that brings it down to 25. And actually,
that's amazing.
Now we're down to only needing another 12. So we've
12,000?
If we get another 12,000 between the matching gift and the other things that we've gotten, 12,000 will get us all the way to the 50,000 we need.
That's crazy. What are people waiting for?
Yeah, and I'll tell you what. If each one of these bloggers could have 2 million followers just on their blog. We're going to bring, if we get the budget we need, we'll be bringing 5 bloggers. Between them, that's 10 million people just on the blogs. And they have people following them on Instagram and Twitter and other
What is Honest Reporting doing on Instagram?
We're not doing a whole lot because
Why?
Because we found so far that it's a little more difficult to get people to engage with more political content on Instagram. They tend to look for some of the lighter stuff. But We've got several interns coming this summer. They're young people right in the demographic, and one of the assignments I'm going to give to them is to say
Because that age group Instagram is very important.
that which yes,
The
that
age group.
And
Snapchat?
Snapchat, we've not found very workable. We tried it in the past, and we've spoken to young people in the demographic. They really aren't looking to Snapchat for political information. Twitter is the main source for politics. Instagram, I think, has potential.
Right.
But what I found is when you want to reach young people, what's the best thing you can do? Ask young people.
My question to you is this, in the day before this table collapsed, it used to be write a letter to the editor.
Yeah.
Now, I'm very cynical. I think that only people who read the letters to the editor are the people who wrote them because they want to see if they got printed.
Yeah.
What should someone really do? They see what they consider bias or unfair or, better as you put it, inaccurate or not factual. What should people do?
Well, there's one thing that every journalist cares about because it's the only thing they have, and that's their reputation. If you lose your... Why do people watch CNN at all? Because they have the name CNN, and to people that means something credible. It's all reputation. You don't have a license to practice law or a license to practice medicine. You hopefully have a degree, but maybe you don't have that. So when a journalist sees a ton of comments on Twitter, so you can respond to them on Twitter, saying that they really screwed up, and links to our Honest Reporting article, because we do all the research for you. If you can say to a journalist on Twitter, here's an article, here's the facts, you screwed up and we have the facts to prove it. Or letters to the editor matter too, because journalists report to their editors. When an editor gets 1,000 emails, which they very well might if it's in response to one of our articles, even if a small percentage of our followers write in, it could be hundreds or even thousands of emails, then the editor turns around to the journalist and says, you're ruining the reputation of our organization, what are you doing? So that kind of pressure makes a difference in two possible ways. One, they might change it or retract it, and we get that a lot. The other is they might hold their ground and act like they're all tough, like, oh, nobody can tell me what to do. But then you see in the future they're suddenly getting more careful because they know that we're out there and that we're watching, and they don't want that to happen to them again. Nobody likes to be critiqued, especially if you can do it with facts that show you've got it right, that you're not just a troll.
Short of time, and thank you for your time. Give me your one-line pitch of what you would hope journalism would represent for Israel.
I think, I don't want to say what journalists would represent for Israel. I think what journalists should represent for our world. And anybody who's living in America or the UK these days will know that journalism has really become divisive and polarizing lately. Journalism should represent a good, solid source of information that intelligent, thoughtful people can use to make up their own minds about the world on any issue.
On that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. It's been a pleasure.
A pleasure as always.